you. After 7 years of being on council, I finally get to chair a committee and I don't even get a gavel. Good evening. I call to order the December 15th, 2020 meeting of the reconstituted Faster and Stronger Public Works Committee. Due to the Safe at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there is a vote, a roll call will be conducted. A committee member will be recognized, raise their hand, and state their vote. Committee members are Councilmember Barbara Haynes Burke, Vice Chair, new to the committee, Councilmember John Larson, returning, Councilmember Annette Scipio, returning, and myself, Councilmember McIntosh, and new to the committee as well. If the committee would indulge me just a couple of minutes, I wanted to just walk through some information I think that might be helpful just about process. I promise this will not take more than a minute or two, but I hope will be of service. If everybody's okay with that, if they give me a thumbs up, that'd be great. All right, great. Okay, so we are now within the auspices of the Public Works Committee. And I want to talk a little bit about what comes to this committee from council members. First thing is DOT, and that includes streets and sidewalks, as well as traffic calming. Transit also falls under our purview, primarily WISTA. Stormwater is something that comes to this committee. Bike ped issues and greenways come to Public Works. Planning and development services. It's kind of bifurcated. Sometimes some issues come to Public Works and some issues come to Community Development, Housing, General Government. Parking comes to Public Works, engineering, rec and parks, recreation and parks, which I'm going to try to change the name of back to Parks and Rec. Some issues for that come to this committee and some issues go to, again, to Community Development, Housing, General Government. And then utilities, has their own governing body, but when they have an issue that needs to be voted on by council, it comes to Public Works. I think that covers most of the major issues and items that come to this committee. Second, I want to kind of go through for both the public and for new members how items get on the agenda. So if a council member has an item that is brought to them by a constituent or just an issue that they want to focus on, they'll either bring that to one of our staff, to a staff member who will then percolate it up and bring it to myself to get on the agenda, or they can just bring it directly to me. Another question that I still find a little hard to figure out is why are some items shown as consent items and why are some items shown as general agenda items? I can't fully answer that, although I know that how universally approved they seem to be, if sort of the feeling is that it will not be controversial, they have a better chance of going to the consent agenda than to the general agenda. Once an item, so let's talk for a minute about once we do our work here on committee, how do items show up on the full council agenda? If we approve, as a committee, if we approve unanimously an item, it will go directly to council at the next meeting, which is typically the third Monday of the month, and it will go to the consent agenda. If it's not universally adopted by us, then it will show up as a general agenda item. So for any questions on that, I'm open to it, but I just thought that might be helpful as we move forward. Okay, let's go to the first part of our agenda, which is the consent agenda. And I would like to ask both committee members and council members if there are any items that they would like to see pulled for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, John Larson would like to pull item C1. Okay,
and the other, seeing that the other one is the approval of our last month's committee minutes, I think we'll probably be okay approving that. Can I get a motion to approve the balance?
So moved. John Larson.
Annette, I can hear you through the wall, but I can't hear you on here.
Yes, I was muted. I move that we approve the balance of the consent agenda.
Okay, now we'll do roll call. Councilmember Burke?
Here.
Okay, are you in favor of approving the consent agenda?
Yes, I'm in favor. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Larson,
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio,
Yes.
and chair votes aye. Okay, thank you. Staff, can we have a discussion on C1?
Item C1, resolution approving the Manor Drive traffic calming plan for funding and construction located in the East Ward.
Good evening, Chairman McIntosh. Well, the item before you specifically is related to traffic calming in a neighborhood. I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Mr. Fansler, our Deputy DOT Director, or to Nate McCullough, our DOT Director, to describe the process that's available to our citizens who have traffic calming concerns and how that works and how these items end up before you at meetings like this. So either Jeffrey or Tanique, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Kane, I'll take it. Good evening, Chairman McIntosh and members of the committee. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So traffic calming requests typically will come to the Department of Transportation, and they come based upon citizen requests for us to look at needs to either reduce the traffic or look at the volumes on a roadway. And when those requests come to us, we do a few things. We will look at the roadways for safety, so we review traffic accidents, but we also then look at the volume. But when we have a neighborhood request or a citizen request to come to us and they said they want a traffic calming measure implemented on their roadway, we will ask them to form a task force of residents on their street. And we will also ask them to have a petition signed. And the intent for that is to make sure that there is a neighborhood support for us to go through the process of starting the traffic calming procedure. Because it is a community-driven procedure, and any measures that we implement, it would require community support. So that petition we need, and the support for us to review it, we need either 3 to 7 residents. I think it's 7 residents that we require to sign that petition at least for us to start the process. And then once we have that support and we have them form a task force, then we will go ahead and determine, based upon the volumes, the connectivity of the roadway with buses and or school buses on the roadway, there's score that's given. And if it warrants traffic calming measures, we'll let the neighborhood know. We will work with the task force to then assess what type of traffic calming measures might work to address their concerns. And then we hold a community meeting to determine if that neighborhood is in support of those devices. If we determine that the neighborhood is in support of devices that that small group has identified, then we will share those measures that that community might ask for with the council member and also with other community sources like the school system, police and fire departments, to make sure that whatever measures the neighborhood think they want will not have a significantly negative impact on the services that police, fire, and others might need to provide to that street. After gaining enough support, we will then send those measures out to the neighborhood, to the residents that live on the street. And in some instances, we will also petition the adjoining streets if the measures that are being implemented on that street would significantly impact those that are driving along the roadway. So we send out a petition, and the petition will require that we have at least 70% of the individuals petitioned to support the measure. Support has to be in the form of a positive vote from those that are petitioned. If people are living on the road or the road that has been petitioned, If they do not vote, then that vote is considered a no. And we then tally and determine if we've got a 70% support. If we have 70% support, then we bring that item before Public Works Committee and then eventually to City Council if this committee approves it for consideration of and approval of the measures and to support the and approve the funding for those measures. And if council approves it, then the project is then constructed. Did I,
Thank you very much.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, I think we've got an excellent case study. Can we show the map that shows that the street being impacted in the neighborhood? Is that something we can pull up at this point, Meredith? I think this is a good case study of the community participation.
Okay, hang on, John. Let's first see if there are questions about the process that
Okay,
Tanique
thanks.
just spoke about. Anybody on the committee or on other council members have questions about that? Okay, now let's move to the specific item. Get a report from staff.
Thank you, Meredith. So what we have here is the residents requested speed cushions to be implemented and installed on Maynard Drive. And we received enough support from the residents on the street such that we are now presenting it to this committee for approval. You can see on the map by the color coding that we used for the votes that we received. Every yes vote received is shown by green on the property. Any locations that voted no is shown by red. And then those that are shown in yellow are locations in which the resident did not vote. And when we identify the resident, it could be the property owner or the person that lives at the house if the house is rented. So, so as you can see by the color coding that we received more than 70% affirmation for the speed cushions. And so we are now asking that this committee and City Council approve the traffic calming measures and the funding to install those measures.
Great. Any questions from committee or from council? I believe this is in Councilmember Scipio's ward. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And have you've had contact with your constituents on the street, I'm assuming?
Yes, they have had, the one thing I would say about traffic calming from my experience is that it's not the kind of thing that is implemented overnight. It is a process and it has to be resident driven. People have asked me and then they have to go through and do the petition and submit that. And that petition means they have to go along their street to get people to sign it. So it is a resident-driven activity. And I guess sometimes people think that, oh, just tell your council member and they can get speed bumps. Well, it doesn't work that way. It is one of the best things I know that residents come together. We have several of them ongoing now, and some neighborhoods and some streets, people are really in touch with each other and some are not. But traffic calming happens to be one of those things that unifies people because it does impact their roads, and they will talk to each other about that. So it's a great process, but it does take time to get to the point that it gets to council. We've just done a resident Zoom meeting, and of course, COVID has impacted this. because residents have to meet now through Zoom as opposed to in person. But they've been very good in that. We have another one tomorrow night for another neighborhood to have their first Zoom meeting talking with our DOT folks about the plan. So that has been established. So it does take time, but it is a good process. And so can I make a motion that we approve this one at this point?
Let's do that. Do I have a motion for approval?
That's what I've done.
Okay, Councilmember Scipio makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Get a second from Councilmember Burke. Okay, all those in favor, I'm going to call the roll. Councilmember Burke,
Yes.
Councilmember Larson,
Yes?
Councilmember Scipio,
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh says yes as well. Thank you. Motion passes.
Jeff,
Okay. Now,
Council Chair McIntosh.
yes, sir.
I did have a question just for my education.
Certainly.
The speed cushion, is that the same device that's used on London Lane in British Woods? Just help me with nomenclature.
Okay, let's have staff weigh in on that, please.
No, sir. Speed cushions are considered what people would think of as speed humps or bumps or lumps in the road.
Okay.
The cushions have inserts in them such that fire trucks and maybe buses, if they're wide enough, can center their tires and ride over them and not be impacted as significantly, but vehicles will have to slow down when they're driving over them.
So it's a new and improved speed bump.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And there are speed bumps, speed humps, speed lumps, speed cushions, bulb outs. There's just a wide variety. Anything associated with Department of Transportation has got lots of nomenclature, and eventually you'll be in the swing. Okay, so that item being approved, let's move on to the general agenda. And Clerk, if we could get you to read that, I'd appreciate it.
Item G1, resolution approving changes in the state highway secondary road system within the existing corporate limits of the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
All right, who on staff is going to educate us on this?
Good evening again, Chairman McIntosh, members of the committee. I'm looking at Mr. Fansler again, hoping I got it right this time. Tanique's nodding her head yes. So our Deputy Director of Transportation, Mr. Jeffrey Fansler, will handle this one.
Great.
Thank you, Damon, and good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Briefly, I will go over this item. So the item before you is a change of the street secondary highway road system, and periodically we work with the state to do these type of changes from what is a state road to a city street, or vice versa. And the item before you is regarding Old Salem Road, and as well as Liberty Street and Main Street. The reason we have broken it out that way is because the name of the road does change there at Brookstown. Although if you look at the map that was presented, you'll understand that it's essentially the same road as it goes to two-way there north of Brookstown. So as I mentioned, periodically, we go to the state comes to us, and we present these add or delete streets for consideration. And the purpose of this one in particular is for a couple reasons. The city has two projects that we're currently working on, and we're working with the state to have some approval to be able to do the work within what's currently NCDOT right-of-way. And so working with the state and their division office, they are not supportive of what the city is wanting to do with our two-way conversion, particularly of Liberty Main. That was a project that was approved through the 2018 bond referendum. And the item before you is essentially taking what is currently NCDOT right-of-way and transferring it to city control. And as I mentioned, the map on this item is pretty self-explanatory. That shows the limits that we are proposing. Staff did look at these limits extensively. We reviewed these with our traffic field operations office. We reviewed these with NCDOT, and all parties were in agreement that this limits made the most sense both for maintenance for the city and for NCDOT. We looked at a number of concerns such as stormwater, such as the current alignment and geometry of the roundabout and how it all interconnected. And these limits were identified to work for all parties. So the limits and the segments are identified as 0.2 miles of Liberty Street, 0.18 miles of Main Street, and then 0.65 miles of Old Salem Road to be transferred from the NCDOT system to the city system. And as I mentioned earlier, this in regarding to a couple projects the city is working on, one being the conversion of Liberty Main Street. What this does is allows the city to have a streamlined approach to be able to execute our design, to be able to do our work that puts the burden on the city. We don't have to coordinate encroachments. We don't have to coordinate approvals, and really streamlines what we're trying to do that we put in front of the voters who approve this project. So this would allow ease of construction and methods to produce a project that we're all really supportive of. I'm happy to answer any further questions you may have.
Councilmember Scipio.
Thank you for that good update. Can you give me an idea of what the anticipated maintenance costs that the city will now incur, since it will be ours to maintain?
So that's a great question. And one thing we tried to do is look at the maintenance costs before we did this. And so one of the biggest concerns for maintenance was stormwater. And that's why we selected the limits that we have selected, because farther south you go, there was a lot more stormwater impacts. And we were kind of trying to stay away from that. So we went to the state and we asked them to let us stop where we stopped, because further south there was more maintenance limits. Right now, current, and Tanique may have to correct me if I'm wrong, but the current resurfacing amount, is about, I want to say $200,000 for a mile. Tanique may have to correct me if I'm wrong, but what we would do, of course, this will be PAVIL eligible, and so we would submit that through our PAVIL program for funding support through our PAVIL program, which is federal support for these street resurfacing initiatives for maintenance of that street.
But right now we don't have an idea of how much. Oh, you're saying the maintenance is the resurfacing, is that right?
There's plenty of maintenance response or issues that could happen. There's stormwater, curb and gutter, resurfacing, all kinds of elements that could result in maintenance charges, but it is really a case by case breakdown.
So just one more question is, when the state owns the road, since we're having this perhaps event in the morning with ice and snow, when the state owns that road, is the state responsible for clearing it? And therefore now we would be responsible for clearing that?
Great question, council member, and that is correct. So currently, when we accept this responsibility, we would accept the snow removal duties on this street like we would for other city streets.
Okay, and I guess
that consideration was given again when we identified these limits.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes, this is in the South Ward. This proposal is in the South Ward. A little back history on it. This is old US 52. And when Old Salem was created in 1950, Main Street was US 52, and it came right up to the heart of Old Salem. And Jim Gray, who was a highway commissioner at that point, pushed through a piece of legislation to allow this road to be built around and protect the historic district. Since that time, as we know, road patterns have changed, and US 52 has been moved further east, and this is really a redundant 4-lane piece of highway that has an impact on the historic district and the town as a whole. It's one of those fragments of state highway that exist as road patterns change within the city, and the city builds out its infrastructure, that little sections of state highway remain within the city. And this is one that's been somewhat, it's been a little awkward over the years, because Old Salem has grown across this road now, and in attempts to get pedestrian crossings and to do changes to the road itself that are more in keeping with the historic district, have required us to go back to the state to do it. Up on the north end, where the road splits, that area particularly has been impacted by the old 52 design, creating a ramping system that has been really dangerous to several of the historic houses on the north end. And the Main Street, Liberty Street two-waying system eliminates all of those ramps, but it does impact state highway property in the process. So this really cleans up a lot of old business and highway patterns in the city, and I totally support it. I think it's going to be a benefit to the historical area. It's going to be a benefit to the residents in that area, and it'll actually long-term, I think, provide a good, clean traffic pattern. It's part of the Main Street, Liberty Street rework.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? I do say that this road definitely begs for a road diet. It does seem like it's a highway. It's being used as a street. So it does seem like down the road we have some opportunity there. Question for somebody on DOT: do we know what the grade of the surface is? I know we try to shoot for an 85% or an 85 rating. Do we have any idea? And my question goes to how soon are we going to have to come back and resurface? I know the two-waying will require us to do some of it, but are we going to be required to do the entire stretch here soon?
So, great question, Mr. Chairman. So we did work with the division maintenance office, and we evaluated some of these. So when stormwater concerns were raised, they also went out and just evaluated the current condition of the road. And there was no issues identified through their review. And we worked closely with those folks, and there was no current, outstanding issues that were identified. I will tell you, with our two-way project, we will resurface it completely all the way to Academy Street. So over half of what's shown will be completed, and it's part of our current project scope.
Okay, and that's within the bond.
That's correct.
The bond funds. Great. Okay, great. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. What is the timeline for this particular proposal taking effect? It will go to council if we agree, and I assume in January, is that right? And then what's the next steps to get it approved and implemented with the state, et cetera?
Council member, this is Jeff again. So it will go to city council, and upon city council approval, it will be presented on the next available Board of Transportation agenda for their approval. So ultimately, they would have to approve it just like the city council would have to approve it. At such time they do, then that transition could be made. But what we're talking now is probably early 2021, February timeline.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Second. Hearing a motion and a second, I'll call the roll. Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Larson?
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio?
Yes.
And chair votes yes as well. Okay. That brings us to G2. Clerk, if you'd read that for us, I'd appreciate it.
Item G2, Business 40 Multi-Use Path Update.
All right, who gets this one?
Good evening again, Chairman McIntosh, members of the committee. I am not looking at Mr. Fansler this time for clarity. Mr. Matthew Burchick of our Department of Transportation has put together his PowerPoint presentation to respond to some of the questions and provide some clarification and information that we have obtained since the last Public Works meeting. So I'll turn it over to Matthew.
All right. Thank you, Mr. DeCane. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and council member. Like Mr. DeCane mentioned, we want to take the opportunity tonight to respond to the request from November, actually the November Public Works Committee, to take a look at the Cherry Street on-ramp bridge of the multi-use path and its relationship to the proposed park. So we wanted to share some information. We've done a little bit of work related to that and wanted to share an update. So we can go to the next slide, please. So just for those who may not be familiar with the history of the multi-use path, I wanted to provide a little background information of where this project originated and the steps we've taken to this point. So back in 2014, 2015, the city kind of led the way on this one and performed a feasibility study for the multi-use path in coordination with Creative Corridors Coalition. and eventually got to the point of submitting that project to the MPO for funding consideration. And I should note the overall project limits for the multi-use path are Lockland Avenue to the Strollway. The section we're discussing this evening is really just from Green Street, the Truist Stadium to the Strollway. So we're looking at that eastern section. And so the city submitted that project to the Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'll try to avoid some of the jargon, the DOT jargon, and explain some of those things. So the Metropolitan Planning Organization is the MPO. And also then in 2018, the city issued there was a bond referendum, and one of those items was the funding of the multi-use path. At the MPO level, the Metropolitan Planning Organization level, once the city submitted this project, the MPO's responsibility at that point was to evaluate candidate projects for NCDOT's prioritization process, which is written there as P4.0. That's the fourth iteration of that process that they had gone through at that point. So the MPO performed that evaluation. The MPO board and NCDOT Division 9 supported the MUP as a priority project, and it went on to NCDOT for consideration. So you can see through the P4.0 evaluation that NCDOT performed, it turned out to be the top bicycle and pedestrian project within our division, Division 9. So at that point, it was included in the STIP, which is the State Transportation Improvement Program, essentially the funding list, or the list of funded projects throughout the state. And that's where it has been ever since. So next slide, please. So that's a little bit of the history of the funding and the process we had to go through in order to get that funding. So that got us through, say, 2014 through 2018. In 2020, we ran into some other issues. One being NCDOT's funding status, that they dropped below their statutory mandated cash floor, which triggered a couple issues. One was a freeze on those federal transportation funds. So the funds that had been programmed for the MUP were temporarily frozen. It also limited NCDOT's ability to enter into agreements, including a supplemental agreement that would be required for NCDOT to have their contractor Flatiron construct the multi-use path. So there were a couple issues that affected the multi-use path construction. As a result, the city is going to be managing the remainder of this project. So next slide, please. So in November, what we shared was that background information about the project, and the discussion that ensued was related to specifically to the multi-use path, the bridge over the Cherry Street on-ramp, and its impact on the Peter Oliver site. So we've done some research related to that, and that's where we are now. We wanted to share that. So if we go on to the next slide, you can see the Peter Oliver Pavilion there, and the proposed pavilion and the proposed multi-use path bridge over Cherry Street on-ramp and connecting with the Strollway. So just to provide some context of what this area will look like in the future. So next slide, please. So one of the first tasks we undertook was to talk to HDR, the consulting firm that had completed the design. And that's one thing to note, is that the design for the entire MUP from, say, Peters Creek Parkway to the Strollway is actually complete. So that and through that NCDOT, the Business 40 project, the design for the MUP was completed. We had that consultant, we had asked them to take a look at what the options were for realigning that bridge in order to reduce the impact of the Peter Oliver site. So you can see this is one of the concepts. If you go to the next slide, this was another concept that they had come up with. And these are really conceptual ideas. They had looked at some of the engineering issues related to the bridge abutments and the impact to the Cherry Street on-ramp, ensuring that the elevation was sufficient to allow vehicles to pass underneath. and then what it would take to reconstruct the existing strollway bridge and the landings for the bridge there. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So this is a recent photo of what that the strollway bridge looks like. You can see the retaining wall there, the gabion basket wall, and this is that brick wall there is essentially where those concepts, where the multi-use path would meet up with, where it would connect with the strollway bridge. So that's just to give you an idea of where that would, the location of that potentially relocated bridge. Next slide, please. So the budget, the existing budget for this section of the project, I mentioned that it's included in the State Transportation Improvement Program, and the project number there is EB 5840. And we have approximately $3.4 million program for this project. You can see the 1.6 million in federal funds and approximately 1.8 in local funds. You can see we've spent approximately 360,000 of that on the design. So I mentioned that through the NCDOT Business 40 project, we were able to have the path fully designed. That was the cost to do so. So you can see the fund balance there for this section of the project. Next slide, please. So in talking with the consultant and working through what it would take to redesign the bridge and proceed with the project accordingly, there were a couple steps involved with that. So the first step that we would need to take is actually to contract with a consultant for them to evaluate the feasibility of redesigning the bridge and the associated structures. That's really the first step. We don't know right now what it would take to do that, and we need some professional engineering help to determine that. The other task we would ask them to complete in this first contract would be to provide a construction estimate to deconstruct the existing retaining wall at the Strollway Bridge, and then construct the entire multi-use path from True Stadium to the Strollway. And that would be funded locally, and we feel that the cost of that would be less than $20,000 to perform that work. But that's just the first step. So that will get us to the point where we understand whether it's possible to redesign the bridge and what it would take to do so. The next step in contract number 2 there is to actually redesign the bridge and the associated structures. So that would actually involve, that's where the real engineering work and the real redesign of those structures would come. And we anticipate that would cost approximately $170,000 to $190,000. And the source for that would be the STIP project. So that EB 5840, we would ask that NCDOT adjust that project amount. So it would be a split between federal funds and a local match. And I should say, with contract number 1, the result, the product that we receive with that is the cost estimate is what we would use to request additional funds from NCDOT. And then we would use those additional funds for the redesign of the bridge, as well as the deconstruction of the existing retaining wall and whatever other structures were needed to be rebuilt, and then the construction of the entire path. Next slide, please. So in order to get to that point, NCDOT, since this is a project that was funded through NCDOT's prioritization process, we would need to run this project through that evaluation again. Like I said, it was funded through prioritization 4.0, and it's in the current STIP. They require that any changes to the scope or budget be reevaluated by the SPOT office, which is the office that runs that evaluation process. And the reason is that the project budget is actually one of the criteria that they use in evaluating projects throughout the state. So they're trying to figure out the cost benefit of all of the projects. So if you increase the cost, that's changing that cost benefit analysis. And you can see there, if the project budget increase lowers the project score below the lowest funded project in the division, then this project would not be eligible for those additional funds. So essentially what they're testing, they're trying to figure out if, the impact of the altered budget lowers the score of that project significantly enough to knock it out of the funded contention. And so that's one of the issues associated with, requesting additional budget for the project. The note there, I had mentioned earlier that NCDOT's financial issues had resulted in the freezing of some of the federal funds that we use for our transportation projects. And slowly they've started releasing some of those funds for projects, and we've been working with them. They've requested from us what our priority projects are so that those can be the projects that are released first. And this multi-use path was one of those priority projects. With that said, we still need to obligate these funds by the end of the fiscal year, or we risk losing our priority position to other projects in other communities throughout the state. So as NCDOT is releasing these funds, we've identified this project as an important project for us. And as it stands now, we would be ready to go through the process to obligate those funds. If we go through a redesign, that changes that schedule. So next slide, please. So there's a couple steps in the NCDOT reevaluation. One is, as I mentioned, through their project evaluation and assessing the impact to the score of the project based on that new budget. The other is the review that they would need to provide on the structure and the project, the engineering itself. So because this is an NCDOT right-of-way, we as a city would be requesting an encroachment agreement from them. And part of that encroachment agreement request involves a review of these structures and the path, the redesigned path. So you can see some of the different categories of issues that they would be looking at and the reviews that would be required. So the bridge support structure, impact to the Strollway Bridge retaining wall, the vertical clearance for Cherry Street on-ramp, and even the trail, the horizontal curve of that trail design. Because remember, the bridge is a trail, so it needs to be designed properly for bike and pedestrian traffic. So next slide, please. So the steps in the schedule, we've highlighted here, the steps in white are steps in the process that we will need to take regardless of whether the bridge is redesigned. The steps in yellow are steps that would be added to the process if we redesign that bridge. So the first step there is contracting with an on-call consultant for the determination of the MEP redesign and the construction costs. So that's the first contract that I had mentioned on that previous slide. The next step there then, once we have the cost estimate, and we can take that to NCDOT and have them perform that reevaluation. It's a quick turnaround on that. The next step then is the State Transportation Improvement Amendment process. Because this was previously an NCDOT project and now is a city project, the STIP needs to be amended for that. So that will occur regardless. And then we would need to enter into an agreement with NCDOT to be able to spend those funds, because again, it will be a locally administered project by the city. And that's where I had mentioned the need to obligate these funds by the end of the fiscal year. This is the process by which we obligate those funds with NCDOT. If we redesign, we would then need to work with an on-call consultant to redesign the MEP bridge, and we estimate approximately 6 to 9 months for that redesign. At that point, we would also need to certify the right-of-way through NCDOT, and then the next steps, construction authorization, the bidding process, and finally, construction. I believe that's my last slide. I know we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, questions from council or committee? Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, this is obviously a complex project, and I appreciate staff spending some time trying to sort through it. Matthew, can we go back to the engineering site plan that shows the alternate locations of these bridges? Can you show me that? We're going to, your slide presentation, I need to refer to some of the images, and I didn't want to interrupt you when you were going through them.
Meredith, I may need your help with that. I think it was slide 6.
Trying to yeah, let's go with these. Yeah. It seems to me that the engineers have taken a fairly aggressive approach to redesigning the bridge. And I'm curious as to why they can't, for example, make the point of the elbow at that first pier right here, go down, there. There's a pier that's being designed. Why they can't launch from that point, not touch any of the retaining wall, get the clearance over the road exactly the same, and simply make the transition at that point over to somewhere in this area as well. Is that discussed? The second proposal is a little closer to that. Go to the next slide. See, a little closer here, they almost take the same thing. But if you use this as your launch point and even create a different kind of pier there where it's a sharper, even sharper angle, it would seem to me that you could remove all of this construction would remain exactly the same. And you could launch off of this pier point, even if you had to redesign this one pier and launch over to this location somewhere doing that. Was that discussed? Do you know?
No, so the concepts that they had provided were very high level concepts. So that kind of evaluation and that kind of design is something that we would have them perform through contract number 1. Well,
there's two things involved here. That one is cost, obviously, and how to minimize the expense of this alteration, and 2 is time involved and impact to the site. And their proposals, don't seem to be particularly interested in trying to salvage any of the previous work done, and it results in some demolition as well as, some additional work that's going to be, run the price up. I mean, here we're saving under this proposal, if possible. I need to understand, we're saving about half of the bridge itself as they originally designed it. That's got to impact the design cost as well as the construction cost. I mean, if they're talking about putting in new piers and what have you, it appears to me that all you're doing is moving the pier of impact on the Strollway further north about 75 feet or yards or whatever it is, and maintaining the other pier locations. You're not even putting in new piers except relocating one. And I'm just trying to understand, because if we're going to deal with something that has a great deal of expense and time delay in all of this and impact, the least impact that we have on retaining walls and what existing work that's already been designed, seems to me that, that's certainly a consideration that we need to be asking them why they're not looking at that option.
I'll tackle that for a moment, sir.
Thank you.
So like Matthew said, that's the point of contract 1, is what can actually be done. So the request that staff received was to move the landing point to the north to an attempt to eliminate the conflict with the Peter Oliver site.
Right.
That there are complications beyond what you can see just by looking at that red line on that map, to include the construction of the bridge itself. This bridge itself is not just simply some pieces of concrete that are set on individual piers. They actually have to be specially manufactured to maintain a certain curve. We have to make sure we maintain the right height so that the vehicular traffic, there's no height restrictions on that Cherry Street ramp. And in order to take all those into account and to maintain that existing landing point would mean the design and construction of a new piece just from that landing point to somewhere a little bit further north. There's just a lot involved in that. So that's why that first feasibility, so that we can have the design engineers take a deeper look into it, is so crucial. It's not just as simple as shifting that from that pier to the north, because now you've created even a gap at that pier, so there's many details that have to be worked out to even maintain what you suggested makes sense, right? If we can come in a little bit further south of where the retaining wall is and the gabion wall, it may save a little money, but it doesn't relieve any of the time issues that are associated with the project.
Well, the two things that obviously scare. So if we could go to the timetable, that last slide you showed, Matt, and let me look at that for just a second. And where we're likely to run into problems here. And my understanding is we got an 80-20 grant from the state. That money's sitting, waiting to be released based on the work that's already been done on a shovel-ready project. All the design work, everything has been approved, run through the state, and we're ready to go as soon as they release the money, assuming we can build this project for the 3.2 million? Is that the total amount we have left now?
Correct.
3.2. We have $3.2 million left to build this project, and we're saying we can do that based on our estimates that have been done, and any changes now that we make could do one of two things. One, it could run the price up, which is what I'm trying to address right now, is to understand where those costs are actually being generated. Because I understand the engineering cost of it, of redesigning and engineering. I'm not convinced yet on the construction cost. And the numbers that are being given us are pretty terrifying actually right now. But I'm trying to understand clearly, how to address this and make sure we're honest in what we're trying to do here. But the second problem is that they will not release the money to build this project, even though 50% of the cost of the project is in this bridge. That they will not release that money if we're still mucking around trying to finesse the bridge appointment as part of the project. I mean, if we have design work going on and we don't have a bid project, we don't have the bid or estimate in yet, they're not going to release the money. They're not going to release the money until we actually have a contract or an estimate contract for construction. Is that correct?
They won't release the money until we have a project that's ready to be built and that they have reviewed and agree with.
Which is what we have right now.
Correct.
We have that right now, but what we don't know is how much this project is going to actually cost us. And if we start manipulating the design at all, then that puts the brakes on saying we have a shovel-ready project.
That's correct, sir.
That's correct. And so, how long it takes to manipulate this particular component of the most expensive part of the project, by the way, is going to can possibly delay the release of the funds that are theoretically ready to be released. What's keeping them from being released today? Since we have a shovel-ready project, why do we not see the money now in our bank account? Because we're going to have to run this project, right? I mean, it's not going to be an add-on to Flatiron, so the city's going to manage it. So what's keeping the money from being released today?
In the prior slides where Mr. Burchick showed you that the state's cash flow issues with their cash floor. So they put a stop to all of this type of funding until they could get that issue resolved. And over time, since that issue was recognized, they've started to release funding for certain projects across the state. And just like all other areas in the state, we were asked to submit what our priority projects were. This is a bond project. It's shovel ready. It's a very high score. It's a perfect project for them to release funds for.
We keep telling when we're ready to receive the money at any point. They're holding the money back right now. Go back to that slide, please, and tell me what the 4-month negotiation on the STIP is about. There's a delay you have some built-in delays seemingly in this, where you have 4 months worth of STIP agreement, even beyond, even if we don't do anything with this bridge, we're still seeing a minimum of 4 months before they will release the money, and then another 3 months before the agreement is executed. Is this correct? So we're seeing 7 months before we'll even have a chance to receive the money? I'm trying to get the timetable clear here, is what kind of delays are actually being created by this proposal
Yes, sir. I'll have Matthew explain what the STIP amendment and the agreement execution are. But on this slide, at step number 5, that's where the delay comes in. We would have to redesign the bridge, and the review time and all those things. So those yellow lines on number 5 is where the new delays come in. As soon as we start to redesign, we come off the priority list immediately because we no longer are shovel ready.
Right. Okay. And we're saying at that point, we've got to allow at least 6 to 9 months. Even if we would decide this month, to do that, we can't present anything back to DOT to start step 3 and 4 until we've finished our review, which is 6 to 9 months. That is philosophically correct. You're dead on, but you also have to put in our local approval process. So we would have to get the first feasibility study done, and then we would have to do a contract through council. So we'd have to do the 3 months. We'd have to do 3 months, number 1. And then we have to do 3 months, 1 month, 1 week or whatever reevaluation. Somewhere in there, there's a county, the city's involved in another couple months. So we got 5 months, say there maybe. And then we've got 6 to 9 months and 3 months. So that's another year, basically. We're dealing with up to a year's delay before we can go to step number 3. Is that what we're saying?
That's correct.
All right. And regardless, and even if we're ready to go to step number 3 right now, which is going to take step number 4 is going to be 7 months. That can't even start until the state says they're ready to release the money, and they're not going to release the money until we present them a complete package shovel ready, which we're not going to have ready for a year. Is that what we're saying?
If you all desire to change it, that could take a year. If we do nothing, we just wait for them to give us a green light because we're shovel ready now.
We're shovel ready now. And as far as the funding goes, right now, if we want to do any changes, we've got to be prepared to shell out at least $20,000 approximately, assuming that the design that they've submitted to us provides some framework for discussion of what their expenses are going to be, to create a document to take to DOT to get their approval, at least for us to go into the major specification drawing, which will give us a final price, which will allow us to get a contract, which will allow to release the money.
We have that $20,000, and we also have some percentage local match on on the 170 to 190,000. And if staff can tell me what the expectation is for our involvement on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, that's a whole nother project. I mean, I agree. I'm trying to figure out, we're talking about money here that I don't even know that's valid figures, but clearly it looks like, they've done some calculation on a design that I'm not sure is even adaptable. I mean, we're talking now about accepting their concept of design of taking $20,000 worth of design work, which is going to result in $190,000 or whatever in additional construction design work.
I don't think that's right, Mr. Larson. I think that 170, 190 is additional design cost, not including additional construction costs. Correct?
Yeah, well, that's right. And so this is why I was raising the question early as to what are we actually designing on this bridge, and whether we've gone down the wrong track of looking at something that's not really even designed to be affordably adapting the work that they've already done. And I'm just kind of amazed that we don't have a variable in there that's a little more conservative in the approach of what they're trying to do.
Okay,
I mean, I'm not sure in the long run this is an affordable project, but it doesn't seem to me that we're starting out on a very clear understanding of what the real cost might be.
Okay, do I have questions from any other committee members or council members? Councilmember Scipio, you're mute. You're muted.
I just have a simple question. I've just forgotten. We are trying to move from the original design where the bridge comes into the footbridge. Is that right? And how much distance is that we're talking about?
Conceptually, on those very rough red line diagrams, I think the maximum distance gained to the north, so it would move to the north a maximum of 45 feet.
45 feet,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes.
From the gray bridge that's on the design where they got the red. Is that right?
So the landing spot on the east side, which is where the strollway is. So from where on the map, I'm pointing at the screen and you can't see me doing it.
Okay.
Sorry, I apologize. So where the current bridge comes in to where the strollway is on the east side, from that point up to where the red line ends at the strollway, that distance is about 45 feet.
45 feet.
That's just roughly, taking that off of the drawing itself. That's without any engineering or anything else. It's just looking at that drawing.
And how does that 45 feet impact? I'm just not getting the impact that people are seeking to have on that bridge by going 45 feet north. What is the impact? Because it seems like a lot of time and a lot more money. I just don't. I'm trying to get.
Councilmember Scipio, it might be helpful at this point. I know Mr. Davis from Creative Corridors is on the Zoom call with us, and I think this might be an appropriate time for him to bring a few comments about the impact to the park project that he sees from his perspective. Is the committee okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the Creative Corridors Coalition has spent a lot of time and money in this area. As you know, we dealt with the Strollway Bridge, and when we first found out about the Peter Oliver story, of course, this bridge design had already been done. And when we were dealing with or discussing this with Walter Hood, who designed this pavilion and the proposed design of the area, he was very concerned about how the bridge just impacted the area. And so we told him we would see what we could do about getting the bridge moved. And I know that city folks have worked hard to try to respond to that, and we appreciate that very much. But if there's any possible way, we would like to move that bridge off of, right above the site where the Peter Oliver field is going to be. And I'll be glad to answer questions, but I mean, that's where we are at this point.
Right. Thank you, sir. Okay. Other questions from committee members or council members?
Yeah, I have.
Councilmember Mundy.
Where is the Peter Oliver project in its planning? I mean, it seems like I've visited this site. I think the original design is quite lovely, and it looks like the bridge is, based on the drawing I see of the Peter Oliver site, is just barely cutting the edge. It just putting, when I'm thinking critical path, we're much further down this critical path in planning than the Peter Oliver Memorial. It seems to make a lot more fiscal sense and calendar sense that we proceed as originally planned and as originally approved, and that the Peter Oliver plans modify somewhat to accommodate what will be the existing infrastructure. That's my 2 cents on this. And I wasn't around when the original design was approved, but it seems like the time to raise all these questions would have been at that point in time, but now we're awfully far down the road to be trying to change our design to fit a design that isn't there yet.
Yeah. Okay. Councilmember Larson, and keep it brief because
Yes, I
this
think,
is not this is not an action item for us tonight.
right. I think Kevin makes a good point. I wasn't around when the multi-use pathway was designed either. So, you know, we did not know about Peter Oliver's field, or did we know that the Museum was going to go into the old bankruptcy building on this site at the time either. So things have changed. The only thing that was certain was the Creative Corridors got Walter Hood to design a land bridge on the Strollway. And everybody liked that, and it was a good investment, and the Strollway took on a new character. With the arising of these other cultural phenomena, then the question was sort of, well, could we done better? And I think anybody who looks at this says, yes, it would be better if we could move this bridge northward and move it a little bit away from the Peter Oliver Pavilion and what's underneath it. Whether it's economically feasible at this time, you know, whether it jeopardizes the whole project, I think is the questions that we're probing tonight. And my only concern is that I think our advice from the engineers may be a little tainted at this point. And I would like at least one more look at that to make sure that we are not that we're not over-engineering this thing, overthinking it, from trying to simply move the bridge with a pivot point that's a little different from what they're showing, and minimize the impact of cost and design time involved in making that change. I'd like an answer to that, either off record, just myself and nothing else.
Well,
Okay,
I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure. I'm not certain how to answer that question without actually doing some type of design, and that will cost money. That's when I need my gavel. Okay, this is not an action item tonight here at committee. Okay, for this to proceed to any point where we're going to spend money, this needs to come up as an action item to finance. So we're talking about January. Okay, so this really is, I mean, we're talking about, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, these are unknown unknowns. We don't know what the financial impact is going to be on the city in a bad budget situation. We won't know that until we spend $20,000. We know it's going to be 20 grand, and we know it's going to be some portion of the 170 to 190 design fee plus the actual change in construction costs. Okay, so if the finance committee is willing to throw $20,000 at seeing what the eventual cost will be, that's up to the finance committee, not public works committee. So I would like to see, John, any questions that you have about process get answered by staff, but staff isn't going to be able, in my opinion, to be able to answer any construction cost questions because those answers don't exist as we speak. And I agree we should push for the most economical way to do it if that's how full council decides to go, but I don't think we can push staff for those numbers right now and say we don't have the proper information. It's going to cost $20,000 and 5 votes on council to get past that point.
Could I get a confirmation on the $20,000? I mean, is that a firm figure, Damon?
No, sir, it is not. We'll be happy to bring that back.
Would you have a conversation and see if there's any variable created by what I've been talking about all night and the pivot point being changed, if that changes their $20,000 at all? Certainly they're going to be able to say yes or no. I mean,
certainly. Yeah, yes, sir. We'll be happy.
So if we're going to take anything to finance, I need to know what that cost is going to be. And it sounds like the first cost. That's the first cost. I'm not sure, even if we know the first cost, that the timetable is going to work to allow us to implement this. We are not going to jeopardize, a multi-million-dollar project at this point. We do not want. It's not the intent of anybody to do that. However, if we can do something better, then we ought to try to at least play it out.
Great. Okay. Any other comments from council or questions? All right. Thank you very much. And my first Public Works Chair meeting is officially closed. Thank you all very much.
Did you make I'm sorry, council member, did you make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I did not. Thank you very much.
Adjourn.
Thank you.
Second, all in favor?
Second.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, council
Thank
member.
you.